Welcome. Thank you for joining us at Empowering Creatives to Live Their Dreams. I'm Jessica Osrak. Today we have two co-founders who advanced through the ranks of different paths to recently meet up and launch Aveniq, an agency that combines the creativity of the human mind with the power of AI. We welcome Steve Holdych and Darren Foote. Welcome, Steve and Darren.
Thanks, Jessica. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here.
Yes, my pleasure. So I'd love to open up the floor for either of you to answer some questions and understand how Aveniq is within your vision. And so could you share the story behind Aveniq and the inspiration to create a new species of creative agency that blends human creativity with tech-driven strategies?
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful for you to give kind of like the North Pass, kind of
Yeah,
like platform first. And
sure.
then because that really sets the platform for everything that we're doing in Aveniq. And
Mhm.
then I can jump more into the specific Aveniq piece.
Perfect.
So it's a great question. And I actually put a book in the background here called The One-to-One Future.
Okay.
And that's really important to kind of set the stage here because I had the opportunity to start my career back in the early 90s
Mhm.
at a bank called Signet Bank that had created Signet Bank Credit Card, which was innovating information-based strategy. The bank that they were creating was Capital One. So I was brought in as the replacement team as the credit card group spun out. And then I was in a group that was chartered to figure out how to use this new information-based strategy, which eventually evolved into the field of data science, in terms of how to go ahead and do marketing within the financial services sector. And so, kind of from that baseline, I've been involved in the industry for about 30 years now, kind of increasingly being in digital transformation efforts across multiple industries. And what that did is that allowed me to kind of see how different industries consider digital, looked at like the interactions within kind of marketing, operations, tech, et cetera, and kind of developed that experience there. So spent 30 years from that first experience from Signet Bank doing first ascents, I would call them, in digital transformation. So I was involved as tip of the spear in about 8 different kind of industry transformations, going back to internet banking, healthcare, digital advertising, et cetera, et cetera. And so as part of that, as part of a digital consulting firm called CapTech Consulting, had a great career there. It's a fantastic firm. But a couple of years ago, the way that technology kind of felt, it seemed as if it was kind of plateauing a little bit. The industry use cases were kind of getting kind of the same. And so, with a long consulting career, kind of decided to kind of take a step back, and really was intending to go ahead and just be a investor advisor, kind of hang out on boards, et cetera, et cetera. So that was about 2 years ago. Well, in that pursuit, I was introduced to a wireless communications company that has a breakthrough kind of algorithm that I said, you know what, I want to go ahead and lead a group of investors here. And so I pooled a group of investors together in January of last year. And then I realized I've never been a general manager of a fund. I better go ahead and have a governance model. Well, I've been hearing about ChatGPT and I'm like, okay, let me go ahead and do something very, very basic just to see a direction about where I should go ahead and get this governance model. And what I saw was the exact same kind of electrification of technology that we saw back in 94. When the browser came out in 94, it was a differentiated technology from everything else that was existing until that point in time. So when you look at ChatGPT and you look in terms of your first prompts and you see something that comes out there, you see that this has this immense power to go ahead and transform how knowledge work at its core can be done. And
Mhm.
so now I'm on the bench, right? So I'm now working as an investment advisor, kind of working with different kind of startups and kind of working with them in an advisory capacity. Uh, and now I have this tool. And I have this tool to go ahead and do a lot of experimentation and R&D kind of on my own for a little while. And what I realized is that this is really kind of Isaac the intern is, LLMs are the king of AI. And that is absolutely a true statement. When you start getting into the properties that they bring in there in terms of the probabilistic underlying areas, there are use cases that are unimaginable before that technology exists. So what do you do with that? So I'm a econ math guy, is kind of nerdy, kind of academic. And so I realized that I can go back to Adam Smith, Wealth of the Nations, back in like 18th century Edinburgh.
Mhm.
And he talks about how do countries develop wealth. And countries develop wealth around three basic ideas. You improve your tools, right? Great. So guess what? There's billions of dollars of capital being spent in improving these AI tools that everybody's collecting, benefiting from that. Two, you get human experience. People get trained, they learn the tools that are being developed in a more and more efficient way. And there's a lot of industry now that's around how do you go ahead and build tools. The third thing is how do you then reimagine, how do you go and solve the handoffs between tasks now that you have new tools and better experience? And that's the area that we really looked at and said that hasn't been fully developed.
Mm.
And so we have relentlessly focused on what we're referring to as the human AI methodology. And there's thinking that's out there, but rather than saying, let's be really focused on automating everything in the world, we took a left turn and said, how do we go ahead and reimagine the enterprise at its core and redesign the enterprise, assuming that the handoffs between activities to accomplish goals are now simply handoffs between people who are supported through AI techniques.
Hmm.
So when you then take a look at that, you actually take a look at Adam Smith's book, and he says there's a surprising amount of productivity that you unlock when you look at the processes in terms of how things get done. And so from a NorthPass perspective, we started suspecting this a while ago, but now we're publicly saying it, is that we developed a knowledge process that allows us to do work 4x to 200x times faster and more efficient than currently approached.
Wow.
And now we're sitting with this methodology and we're now talking with different VCs, talking with different startups, and like everyone's like, okay, that's unbelievable. It's kind of unbelievable when you first no one believes at first, right? So we've been walking in the wilderness, and so I was talking with one of my startups, and I said, hey, what are you doing with marketing? And they said, well, we've engaged an agency. They're working with a video. I said, well, how much are you spending on that? How long is that taking? And then they said, it's XYZ, and it's going to be 3 months to do. I said, 3 months? Why don't you just do that in like a week? Well, we got an entire process. And so I had friends in the industry. And so I went to different agencies and I asked like, hey, based on the models that you're bringing out here, I'm seeing this ability to go ahead and both increase the efficiency, but also improve the quality of these creative outcomes.
Mm.
What are the agencies doing it? And there was this nervous shuffle, like, hey, our models are really kind of tied to billable hours and things like that. And so I realized that there was going to be a lot of industry kind of going down this path for a period of time,
Mhm.
and I needed to go ahead and have an agency. And so starting in November of last year, I started kind of looking for kind of a leader in the creative industry that might share the same vision, and had the good fortune back in February to be introduced to Darren. And so through that background, have taken this NorthPass knowledge methodology about how do you go ahead and collaborate together in a new way.
Mhm.
And now we've kind of adopted that into the creative agency, with the partnership that we've established.
Yeah, and so the reason I felt like that was super important is because it does help provide that foundational kind of like element
Right.
because Steve is going to be focused in lots of different industries, and certainly Jessica, from my perspective, I've been living in the agency world for almost 30 years now. It started off in England. Like Steve, I started off in direct, Wavrap Collins. You may have heard of like Rap Collins. It was this
Oh,
big
yeah.
like
I
global.
worked with them actually.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're very familiar. So that's where I
Mhm.
started in London. And then when I came stateside, I started to get into more interesting brand-led creative agencies. I worked at Kramer Krasselt, Martin, and then I went to Modernista, ran the Hummer brand there, and then came back to Martin Agency here in Richmond. And
Mhm.
so I've done, I think, probably around 12 years at Martin. And then throughout that whole time frame within the career, um, I could see slowly the industry world changing and changing massively since digital came along, a lot like
Yeah.
Steve. I could really start to see the landscape changing. And I also worked at Digitas on that stint in Boston. And so for me, that curiosity and innovation, I always knew that there was a different way for us to be able to work on solving creative problems and bringing creative work, inspiring creative work to the world. And what I could see was the constant struggle when I was working at some of the larger agencies to actually be able to deliver um, the margins that the holding company were necessarily expecting, combining that with realistic budgets on the client side.
Mhm.
And there was this massive friction on both sides of that equation, you know, where a holding company would be really trying to figure out how can we make more money from our agencies. And then at the
Mhm.
same time, clients, of course, saying, I want my money to work as hard as possible. And so what's been really interesting throughout that journey is for me, I always knew that there'd be a more efficient way of trying to figure that out. And then once I saw generative AI sitting from a marketing kind of perspective, I could see with my knowledge in digital as well that this was going to be revolutionary. And so, what was great in chatting with Steve really early on was delving into this white paper that Steve wrote. You won't hear him talk about it much, but it's like a 70-page white paper about the academic side of that hidden lag that he was talking about. And so
Mhm.
yourself being a creative professional, understanding the creative process and all those handoffs that happen throughout that creative process, there is a lot of unproductive time.
Mhm.
And it's what that allows us to do if we can remove that, then we can spend more time as creative strategists, media people, really thinking about higher level ideas and really pushing the tools to help us explore some of those. So for us, in the first 6 months of operation, you know, we've been able to work with, I'd say, probably half a dozen different engagements. And we're already seeing like at least a 4.5 times, like Steve talked about, impact on productivity in terms of how we're working, which is revolutionary. And that means we're not burning people out, kind of like based on hours. We're getting amazing work done and we're getting it done in a shorter space of time. But the really important thing is, and you touched on this, the vision is combining that creative human ingenuity
Mhm.
with AI to really help when you're trying to crunch on some of those things that perhaps would normally take 2 weeks or so. Like to get a starting point on something, you know, or explore all these different strategic options that you might have to explore to get you to a certain place where you're like, okay, there could be something interesting there. And so that's the vision. The vision is how can we capitalize on human ingenuity to unleash creativity, you know, at a higher, I would say, human level, take away a lot of the inefficient things that sometimes we have to work on so we can focus on pushing the work and the ideas even further and using AI to help us remove that hidden lag.
Mm. I love that. So, Aveniq combines a tech forward approach with creativity. How does this iterative, efficiency focused model set it apart from traditional agencies? And what advantages does it bring to creatives and clients? I mean, you touched on a lot of it with shortening timelines, helping with the burnout. I mean, I even imagine that account managers, I think of the client saying, I need this done in a week. And the creative team saying it's going to take 3 months and the account manager being put in that difficult situation. That's what I was thinking that could be completely cleared up. Is there anything else that you want to talk about around that?
I mean, I think you're exactly right, but I think what this is early days, in us really figuring this out. But I will
Okay.
say, as an example, we've had to develop a new brand from scratch for one of our clients with a private investor. This brand will be launched nationally. It's going to be launched in a larger US market at some point next year. So I can't go into too many details about it. But what I can tell you is in developing this brand from scratch, in the traditional methodology, that would have taken us at least 12 weeks to
Mm.
get to where we've got to within that process. Now, we've done that in 5, and we've done it with a 4.5 times more efficient approach. So 300 or so hours instead of 1,500 hours. Now, that is me working a lot with our creative director, who is also an ex-Martin Agency creative director,
Mhm.
um, really pushing and honing the tools and working very differently in terms of how we work. And so I would say that there are really 4 key benefits to working this way beyond just productivity and efficiency. If you're more productive and more efficient, that means that we can share in that value that we're gaining. So our clients can obtain that service at potentially a lower price point,
Mhm.
and we can also share in some of that value of that gain time frame from an agency perspective, because a lot of agencies are really struggling. So
Mhm.
that's the second kind of like benefit, I would say, in addition to productivity. But another thing that's really been fascinating um, has been unlocking what the things we can do in terms of artifacts that we couldn't do before, that would have taken a long time. And here's another example. As we've been working on redefining this new brand, it's in the medical services space. What we've been able to do is find all these academic white papers globally that exist to give us really interesting academic research on this very specific industry. We found hundreds of these white papers in a snap.
Mm.
We were able to then prioritize, okay, here's 20 that are from reputable firms that are in the last 2 years. Go through, figure out what the key themes were based on all this academic research very quickly, to then summarize all those key findings to actually unveil insights that we never would have been able to get without a team of 50 researchers going through and finding all these reports globally,
Mhm.
to then sift through, read them, and then go through and summarize all of that manually. So for us to bring a hidden insight that that client had never even known about
Yeah.
into a meeting, all of a sudden they were like, huh, I didn't know that. I'd never thought of that. And so we used that kind of like as a cornerstone of our strategy, in terms of how we were going to unlock the market opportunity for them. So
I
the
might just add to that,
yeah,
in terms of quality, is that, we had
Yeah.
done the traditional sit-down interviews. And so we had their internal perspective about how that brand could fit within the industry that they're sitting.
Mhm.
And then we did the academic review and brought back, and it both confirmed about 80% and 90% about what had been discovered. And it identified 3 concrete elements of how this brand would materialize out in the marketplace that they hadn't thought about before. So it was this great complementary where it kind of validated some of the things that they were seeing internally, and then
Mhm.
helped them expand their thinking about other elements within their service model that they hadn't considered before, that are now kind of being incorporated within this go-to-market kind of activity.
and so that's the
Yeah.
third thing. It's allowing us to find uses and tools that we never thought were possible. And we've also been leveraging synthetic personas as well, where we can develop personas of our audience and then build bots based on the audience to then go through messaging to really figure out what type of messaging will actually resonate
Wow.
with that audience, just to do in terms of exploring,
Mhm.
our messaging options. But the last, and I would say probably most important, is it can really help expand our creativity. So Andrew Bailey, our creative director, has been able to, when you work on, say, you work on a new brand assignment, it enables you to explore so many possibilities super early in the process to then figure out what universe can I work within to then quickly get to those solid, really interesting ideas quickly. So you're almost able to sift through a lot of the low-hanging fruit quickly and then layer on that human ingenuity, like I said, where Andrew can spend most of his time then saying, that's an interesting starting point. Now, how do I articulate that in a better way? How do I bring that to life creatively? And so for us, that's how we're leveraging it throughout the whole creative process. And then we haven't done too much production yet. We've done one in-market test for one of our clients, and Andrew is leveraging various tools to help assist him in terms of different versioning and different messaging at scale, because that was obviously much quicker than manually doing that. So yeah, those are just a few different ways to build on that productivity point as you go through that whole creative process. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. And so you did touch on the fact that agencies are struggling right now. And so I'd be interested, and I hear the same thing, a lot of the larger agencies in particular. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, what your insight is as to why and if this tool can help the agencies and where they're struggling.
So I think it's a good question. So I've seen an attrition, I would say, over the past 10 years within the industry
Mhm.
of, let's call it, margin, particularly on the agency side. And you probably are aware of this, going from that percentage of media fee model, to then going to AOR, to then doing the billable hours model and trying to hit specific margin goals. Now, what's happened over time is less fees generally have been paid to agencies as more money was shifted to what was seen as working media. And I'd say that in quotes because an idea is a working is working media, kind of like from a creative perspective. We really believe in the power of those ideas. And so what you've seen is, I think, just generally an attrition on the fee side in terms of income. And then what's happening is a lot of people have been having to work hard to really try and hit those margin numbers and overwork. And so I've seen that happen kind of like on our side, so that the motivation from a team perspective is not potentially at the levels that it once was, particularly with the larger agencies, which is why I think we're also seeing a lot of innovation happen in this space. The rise of independent agencies over the past few years and the different models that can work a lot more efficiently because they don't have a holding company that they're beholden to. They can provide a much more nimble level of service. I do feel that digital has had a big impact just in general overall on the industry because it's fragmented all the different agency offerings as well. So I would say as digital has become more prevalent throughout, I think that has made the agency landscape a lot more fragmented in terms of who's actually providing creative ideas. It could be Google doing it, it could be Facebook doing it, it could be all of those players are all part now of your marketing mix, when before, you used to have one agency that would work on all those different elements. And so I think it's just become a lot more complicated. And in some ways, the rise of the independent agencies in some ways is going back to that as well, I think, which is really interesting.
From a non-agency perspective, from a guy
Yeah.
who said, listen, I'm a consumer of agency stuff. I want to kind of use these kind of services. I'd offer that there's kind of two things in play and then a giant question mark as the third kind of pillar on this. I think on the client side, working with agencies up to the models right now started kind of leading to some frustration because of the timelines, the time lags. I shared that story about this thing I saw about last year, and 3 months to go ahead and create a 2-minute video to a non-agency individual just doesn't sound right. And so you actually have this inferred, like, what's going on here? I don't understand the craft. I don't understand these timelines, and I'm spending money. So, okay. So there's some frustration there. Darren articulated fantastic that the model of pushing creatives, midnight hours, weekends, there's a high burnout situation. So you have both a client dynamic and an industry kind of work enjoyment dynamic. And so I think that as we think about this moving forward, the revenue associated with agencies is going to start going towards much more of an outcome-based, okay, hey, you have an idea, you have a strategy, how are we going to go ahead and work on what those outcomes might look like? We're going to discuss kind of what, maybe a fee for performance model. So we think that the agency models are going to shift here a little bit to more kind of outcome-based. Hey, did your thinking actually accomplish an outcome? And we think that there's two macro things. Clients would like to see things more efficient, with bigger scope, with bigger outcomes. And then I think, again, working with Darren, the burnout is real, and finding a way to kind of create a different model for people to work in a much more relaxed, congenial manner.
Yeah, get back to what they love doing, create, and then also have fun in life outside of work.
Right. Do you feel that the younger generations with I mean, I've been in the recruitment industry for 20 years. I started in IT even a little bit before that. And so there's different mentalities for different generations, right? And I know the younger generations are more demanding more money, demanding more free time, demanding more life balance, whereas it used to be really revered to work hard and work long hours. So do you think that that has contributed to the shift as well?
I think definitely. I see it, within my daughters. They have a very different value set, and in some ways, it's the right value set. I can't believe, kind of like going into the working world. I say this now as a 50 something, that there was that expectation, and in some ways, I do feel that in the agency world, we kind of lost our way a bit. The amazing thing about working in the agency world is you get so excited and into the ideas and you love what you're doing. It's invigorating, and it's hard to stop creating and stop finessing all of those details. So I can understand how it happens. And that's part of why it happens, is because the work is so rewarding, being around people talking about possibilities. But you're exactly right. I think there's a new generation with new value sets, different expectations. Plus, I think combine that with a lot of people that have gone through the agency process or worked in the agency industry now for a while, who have just had enough and kind of want to get back to actually having a life outside of work as well. So I think that we're seeing it on a number of fronts. But yeah, I agree. The new generation has perspective.
Well, and we had the benefit of partnering with a startup entrepreneurship program that's focused on kind of a values-based entrepreneurship model that we brought our generative AI knowledge into it. And it's focused on the high schoolers and college students to go ahead and make a decision to run your company based on a set of values, set of ethics that you can understand your effect around the world and the stakeholders that you're involved in. And we brought AI into it because what AI allows you to do is it allows you to spend the time to look at the world with the depth that you can look at it. And you can solve these problems in a much richer, more informed methodology with these tools. And so we saw these high school students, we trained about 20 of them through this new methodology mindset ownership program over the summer. And they are really excited that they can have these tools that allows them to have a vision of very, very, very complicated problems in the world, that they can actually make meaningful progress with this ability to doing it. So that's what we saw over the summer with some of the
Yeah.
younger kids.
And I'll say, like you asked about the vision, kind of like up front, our vision is to put that balance right, to exactly what Steve said as well. It's like we're not that type of agency as part of being a new species. We are
Mhm.
building it from the ground up around that notion as well. We have a life outside of work that's really important that will make us even better in work.
Hmm.
Short space of time that we need to be there. And now we have a tool that can help us unlock that. So that's great. It's a win, 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 win.
I love that. So it sounds like when you're working on a project, you start at this level and then you're going up, right? With the performance and the meeting the deliverable. But with AI, it's already setting you at a higher level of information, of
Exactly.
knowledge, of ideas, and essentially support. So rather than bringing AI in to replace people, it's really bringing in people to amplify the level that people are working at.
That's exactly right. And I would say almost for me, like it's that level that you're starting at, that you pointed to, that higher level. What you're doing is essentially you're going through that work super quickly that would
Mhm.
normally have taken a lot longer to get to that level. It's just like that. So that then you're exactly right. You can work with what you have and apply that creativity, innovation, your strategic rigor to then really push the work even more, which is that more enriching work as well. So, as you're talking about empowering creatives, it gives them a lot to work with. And that applies to strategists as well. It's about investigating, everything that you can possibly investigate to turn over some of those really interesting ideas and angles.
So there is fear around AI replacing jobs. And you mentioned that this really contributes to the R&D team. So people who love research, do you see AI replacing them, or how would that enhance their career as well?
Yeah. So this is from a topic perspective, there's a lot of fear in the industry in that people have been trained with the tools and techniques that they've developed experience in doing it one way. And it would be disingenuous to say that those ways are going to persist as the norm.
Mhm.
That just the ability for AI tools to augment and support human creativity is going to move the new tool set really to a new way of working. And so that's where the job changes will occur, right? And so that's why I want to kind of really encourage, and this is what we talked about with our high schoolers this summer. So look, listen, every single time you have new tooling come on board, it's disruptive for the industry and the society that's developed their processes and their businesses around how things are done. So things, how they're done, are changing.
Mhm.
And it's both a creative world and a world at large from a knowledge perspective. In our research, and this is what I just share with the high schoolers and with everybody, is like working on the other side, there's plenty of work to be done. There is so much work to be done with these new tools and techniques that once we kind of work through this, people who want to kind of really work on this new model, I will guarantee there will be work. We're going to have to go through some transition for right now because people are going to learn the tools. There are going to be those imbalances, but in being able to accomplish much bigger things for society, these tools allow us to sit on different levels of plane of ability than we
Mhm.
were able to. And that's where the jobs are going to evolve to. It's going to be a little nerve-wracking for right now. And so I really do encourage people to embrace it, experiment, learn, because your skills are needed. They are needed. I can't turn into a creative. I know that. I tried to and I failed. And so this is why it is going to
Yeah.
be a human enterprise in the future. It's just going to feel different. And so
Yeah.
that's how I would say it. Yeah.
I see it as like it's almost like upskilling, it's human plus AI as you think about it. And even in some of the more traditional agencies, they're really investing heavily in how do they upskill and think about what was a traditional process and augment some of those traditional processes with AI tools within that process to really help plus up, that individual or enable them to unlock speed or
Mhm.
unlock broader thinking like we're talking about. But the difference is, as we think about Aveniq, is we're actually trying to build it from the ground up. So we're not retrofitting it into an existing process, which is for us a differentiation. So back to your question, I think we see it as really augmenting people's growth and their productivity. And to Steve's point, there is definitely an adjustment. And I think this happens with a lot of new technology. It happened when we think about digital coming out. People immediately were like, oh my goodness, what does that mean? Without really understanding what that impact might be. And so I think we just have to work through that as teams in society,
Yeah.
industry, governmental. But yeah, it's just an unbelievable tool that we have to figure out how to leverage.
Hmm. And it is normal for most of society to respond to change with some level of fear.
Yeah,
But as you mentioned, if we look historically, I mean, I'm going way back, but the automobile came on, the computer came on, the internet came on. Now it's
yeah,
AI.
exactly. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so we continue. And that's the wonderful thing about humans is we do know how to adapt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to that point, a lot of people's fear sometimes is they haven't really jumped in yet and really done it to understand how it can help them. Because once you have those aha moments, you're like, oh my goodness, I can do that. Oh,
Yeah.
now I
Mm,
get it.
right.
And the tools are only going to continue to get better for all of us.
Hmm. Great. So, can you share a recent project where Aveniq pushed boundaries in the creative space, and what were the most significant takeaways from that experience?
So, yes, I can. I would say there are a couple of examples that I can bring up. I can't share the actual client names due to confidentiality, but I can talk about the nature of the project. So, one of them was developing a brand from scratch for this new brand that's going to be launched mid next year. And in a traditional model, what would have taken 12 weeks to get to a starting point, we were able to achieve in half that time.
Mhm.
Now, it could actually been significantly quicker, but what we're actually finding is we work a lot faster than sometimes our client infrastructure can allow as well, which is great. It means we can spend time also working on other concurrent projects as well at the same time. But that productivity gain, like we talked about a little bit before, was 4.5 times working on that brand from zero to new brand in 5.5 weeks, which is quick. Now, in terms of the breadth, because you also asked about that, that got us to 12 designed, well articulated brand positions that we could then figure out what was the right zip code, the recommendation that we needed to explore. So it did provide us with a breadth of really rich ideas. We had 12 amazing choices, but clearly we honed in on the ones that we felt met our strategy probably the strongest and will make the biggest impact in the marketplace. Then the other thing that I would add to kind of like support that was some of the strategic insights that were unveiled as part of that strategic rigor that we put early on in that process helped guide some of the interesting design elements because we knew we needed to appeal to a certain type of person. And the insight that we developed really helped guide some of the creative direction to really help us articulate that in a way that we may not have been able to understand before because of this technology that we were able to apply to our research and discovery. Now, that's one example. I would give you another, which is we went from zero to in market for an ad test for another one of our clients who had never done advertising before. And we developed a market test for them to establish how marketing could potentially help them in their pipeline. And so what we did was actually develop a test and creative from scratch to in market in 1 month. And then within that, we probably had around 25 different versions of creative that we were able to deploy within that across 10 markets and do that at speed, efficiently, just in a much more nimble way. And we were able to deploy that and spend less budget than we originally allocated to quickly get the learnings that we needed to get. And so that was just another kind of like example that we were able to work on for one of our clients.
I still like the Aveniq persona. In March of last year with the 3.5 version, my background in the one-to-one feature, I had been exposed to the Ocean model, in terms of kind of targeting people. So in March of last year, I started designing, like, can this thing kind of create and then allow you to work with synthetic personas? And that's true. I mean, so I'm not an academic. Unfortunately, there are academics that are out there that actually did validate this, both out in China and on stateside, that you can now craft, these synthetic personas that you can then interact with. And so that's something that we're now doing almost on a consistent basis with our clients to go ahead and say, hey, client, you may not understand how the 20 different kind of profiles might interact with your message. Let's just go ahead and work you through kind of how different people, different types of individuals might respond to your efforts. And again, I'll mention what we mentioned earlier. We've been able to turn that into a little chat GPT for the sales and business development side. So you have your marketing group says, here are the personas. Now the sales team has a little bot that they can go ahead and run their tailored messaging that's tailored for their business as part of that effort. So those are just some of those kind of strategic things that you think about just 3 years ago. Hey, we're going to go ahead and create synthetic personas that are tailored for your business. And then we're going to create an engine that will allow you to go ahead and take any piece of content at all and then translate that into any output thing tailored for that persona. Those are the things that we're kind of bringing to market with Aveniq, with our clients.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yes. It certainly is fun. And like Steve, as you can probably sense, with Steve's background, what's been fun for me is Steve has been able to, if I say, if only we could do this, Steve will quickly go away and build something. He'll say, well, hey, look, check this out, Darren. What about this? What about that? I'm like, oh, yeah, that's pretty interesting. But what about if you did this? And so he and I will bust each other's chops, as we go through a lot of that stuff. But like Steve, for example, I think he mentioned this earlier. Steve was trying to come up with his own TV spots, but not working in the creative industry. It's like these are the things where you work together and you're like, but yeah, I mean, that's great to get to a certain point in terms of proof of concept, but now it needs that creative ingenuity. So these are some of the things that, as we talk about in terms of having fun, things that would normally be friction points if you're dealing with somebody that is AI forward and also a creative person, that actually is the way forward, because we're able to collaborate on those items and then keep each other honest, which I think is great. And that's why I love, like, Steve's doing this in other industries as well. Obviously, we're just talking about marketing kind of like right now, which is why I'm.
But we got to say about how fun it is, though, because so being unleashed with all these little creative tools, I spent some stints on like learning auto video generation, Sora, the HeyGen avatar. And so I build all these little things. I think like, oh, I just want to show the public what these look like. And so I share it with Darren and with our creator. They're like, no, no, like you can't release that. So it is a lot of fun, and that we get to do a lot of internal R&D that we get to see and kind of goof on. And then these guys kind of make sure that anything that's published is polished and professional.
But that's where it helps in terms of just developing those approaches. And we are in that Wild West moment, where we're bringing all those different elements and those different tools
Yeah.
together and different workflows,
Yeah.
which are fascinating. And if you were in a traditional model,
Mhm.
you wouldn't be able to necessarily think that way unless you as a person think across kind of like boundaries. And there are those people out there, don't get me wrong, in those agencies, but I think this is pretty unique in terms of what we're able to do.
So clearly, you both are very open to using AI, but how do you inspire and empower your team to bring their best ideas forward and to be flexible and embrace the tools?
I'll start on this one. It's just giving people permission. I think a lot of people start with this is going to steal my job, right?
Mhm.
And so then they might go home, they use maybe a free public version that's not that strong,
Mhm.
right? And so they're like, oh, okay, I did a recipe, but I don't see what's out there. And so it's almost a one-on-one kind of initial mentorship introduction to say, hey, here's what these things can really do. And so there's a breakout mindset that comes through that. It only takes 2 or 3 hours to like change people's minds.
Mhm.
And then what you do is then you say like, and by the way, there are thousands of tools out here. And our experience is this. Our experience is that each individual will end up finding with about 5 tools that they're going to use all the time. That's tailored to their experience and background. So Andrew Bailey's tool set's different from my tool set.
He's the creative
Yeah, he's the
director.
creative director. He has a different set of use cases and different set of outcomes that he's trying to work with. And so
Mhm.
he's become an expert in some of these creative oriented tools that I have no idea what he's doing now. What we do is we form a nucleus where we all agree on a core, a large language model, and then we have techniques that we all understand. But that the material that we produce then propagates into each person's domain of expertise, and
Mhm.
they're given permission to go ahead and push the tools as far as they can.
The other thing that I will add is what's really important for us is just curiosity is just something that I think Steve and I both have in common that's kind of guided our careers as we've gone through this. And so I would say that as we think about who we bring on to kind of like join us, they're naturally curious. And it's not that they're necessarily AI proficient right from the get-go, but they understand they're curious about how it can potentially help push them, to kind of like even more heights. And so I'm a really great example, like just after working with Steve, I'd done my own kind of like, oh, what can I do on this? And then after working with Steve, my perspective has completely shifted. So you were talking about how do you motivate people along in that process?
Mhm.
It's doing it and
Yeah,
collaborating
that's
kind of like
definitely
with
doing it.
others to help lead them. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, like after working kind of like at this level, after I'd say it's a month, it might be 2 months, you'll get to a point where you're like, oh wow, I can never do things the old
Yeah,
way, kind
yeah,
of like anymore.
Right.
So there's that curve, that you go through in terms of bringing people along on that journey. And I haven't met anyone yet who, even if they're apprehensive about it, kind of like at first does not, get their mind blown by what is achievable now that
yeah,
wasn't in the past. So really it's collaborating. Yeah, and it's a human
yeah.
business. It's never going to stop being a human business. This is about
Right.
people working together doing great work. Now we got a great tool to be able to assist us and say, oh, what about this, Steve? What about
Yeah.
that, Steve?
Yeah, I know this. I have to say this because it's current right now is people want to believe what they want to believe right now. And what AI can do is still unbelievable to 99.9% of people, even if they believe that they've deeply studied this. We have a current situation right now where, concurrently, we've had Congress just drop another omnibus bill. It's 1,500 pages. They dropped it last night. And, it's supposed to be voted on by Friday or everything will shut down, blah, blah, blah. And the weeping and wailing of like, how can we ever read through all this? Who could do this? So it's done. We've developed the scripts to go ahead and do that. We're sitting on the report right now that's been able to go ahead and parse through that entire document. We
Mhm.
have the entire thing ripped out, ready to go. And that's where this technology can go. So I want to kind of really inspire everybody that this technology can do things that people don't believe possible. It is
Mhm.
possible today, not next year, to be
Yeah.
working through that omnibus bill thoroughly and to go and understand what's in it. And wherever you're in, no big deal. But we now have an effective way to parse through extremely dense material and bring it to a way that people can do it. And so that's just another example of how we rethink things through our methodology almost every single day. Is, how would you go ahead and solve that problem? Okay, well, here's some prompts, here's some scripts.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Bob's your uncle, as
Yeah,
we would say in England. Yeah.
And then you can go and enjoy the rest of the afternoon in the park
that's exactly right.
and
Exactly.
have dinner with your family.
That's exactly
I,
it, Jessica.
I'm a big surfer,
There
and
you
I have
go.
a relationship with a guy who goes out surfing and wants to have the time back, and so that provides that extra space in the day to go ahead and get something done. It's accomplished. You feel good. You've pushed it along, and then you go
Yeah.
and take a little break. So
Great. So, Steve, with a background in data science and digital innovation, what led you to co-found Aveniq, and how has this path helped you build your dream career?
yeah, that's a great question. And so really the path that I'm on right now, Darren's mentioned a couple different times that I'm working in different industries.
Hmm.
So about a year and a half ago, I was wrestling with your question, what's going to happen with labor? What's
Right.
going to happen with employee? And like I said, I don't know exactly. But
Mhm.
what I do know is I do know that enterprises will be built with these human AI models at their core. And so about a year and a half ago, I created with this methodology a notion of a North Pass startup studio. So now I'm working within kind of the VC community with startups and early stage companies to go ahead and help them kind of adopt these tools and to kind of start from them from scratch. So what I start with Aveniq first. Well, if I'm going to start a bunch of startup companies from scratch with this new tool methodology, one of the things that I wanted to do is make sure I had a world-class agency that was working with me on those new efforts, as opposed to working with third-party agencies that I didn't know whether or not they had adopted these new tools and techniques.
Hmm.
And so if I then looked at okay, what's the risk of an agency build? What's the capital required? And then if I'm going to build multiple companies down the road, what's logically the most sense? Hey, an agency is a nice place to start. It's a kind of knowledge-based industry that allows people with skills and knowledge come together in a new model, and allows to go ahead and provide a proof point to the North Path Startup Studio that this knowledge approach is working out. And so also just the direct marketing and data science, as bad as my color blind eye is for the final creative, I love creative. You can look at kind of the background here. So my father-in-law was an art professor. This is a little kind of sketch of his back here. And so I love, love, love working in the marketing space with the skills that I have. And
Hmm.
the skills are, I understand data science, I understand human psychology, I understand kind of how to kind of synthesize this with machines. And so now I'm just having a lot of fun with Aveniq to go ahead and really see if we can imbue this human AI methodology into the agencies, and then we'll kind of use Aveniq into subsequent companies as we build those out.
Okay. And was there a defining moment in your career when you realized that your journey was aligning with your passions and your dreams?
So it's interesting. So I've had a great career, and so I've had one of those careers where I've been blessed with just being at the right place at the right time. So Signet Bank was able to kind of be pretty much first in the ground in the financial services industry. I was the father of robo advising. I can look at things back in '96 to connect to people around that. And so through the CapTech model, it was fantastic for years in that I was brought into corporate America
Mhm.
with the stress of being a consultant. So that kind of, balanced that out, but to go ahead and do really, really interesting cutting edge stuff. Last, 10 years, again, the technology coalesced around some things. And so just, got less and less interested in doing kind of digital, the same thing. And I was planning on retiring and taking it easy. And then I would just say the electrification of having generative AI to accomplish things that used to take just grudging weeks to get done, where now it can be done instantaneously, or
Hmm.
you can go ahead and accomplish things that you would never do in the past. I'll bring this back up. I did write a 70-page white paper to put this all together. I'll probably never publish it because it's not edited. You kind of have to follow my line of thinking. But before generative AI, I would have kept those thoughts trapped in my brain, and I would never got on paper. I never would have designed this methodology, and I would never would have designed the North Pass Startup Studio, and Aveniq wouldn't exist. It's all because of what you can do now with these next generation, the king of AI is LLMs tools to go ahead and reimagine how we can work together. And so that's what I'm really excited about. So great career. And now kind of the second half. Oh, this is what I really want to now. I really know I want to be a thought leader, an inspirer, and coach.
Mm.
And I also really know I don't want to be CEO. So if you look at some kind of funny kind of structures here, is that every company that I'm building, I'm seeking to have a CEO who can go ahead and do the running of the organization, or I work with them in kind of partnership in this thought leadership, innovation, kind of adoption mode that's out there. So that's kind of what I'm enjoying doing now, for sure.
And I love that you're bringing in a unique perspective that you can have a vision for a company, but you don't have to be the CEO. You can recognize what you do best and actually what you would love and enjoy doing the most, and then
Yeah.
bring in other partners and people to fill in the gaps.
That's exactly right. And actually, I'll put a plug into a little known management consultant called Itzhak Zedis. He wrote this book called Mastering Change and Corporate Life Cycles.
Hmm.
Both, I read those books about 2 years ago, and it transformed how I looked at enterprise. I held myself in the past to the ideal that I should do everything perfectly, and I just had to work on those flat sides to get to an ideal. And really understanding that human enterprises are collections of people with strengths that are complementary to one another. And then how do you find where your strengths are and how do you fit within that? And then how do you build the team dynamic to go ahead and foster those relationships? That's kind of one of the things that determine, like, I don't want to be CEO anymore. I want to be the innovator, thought leader, inspirer, and I can find people with complementary skill sets to work with in this new way.
Very cool. So, what advice would you give to creatives who want to integrate technology in their work, but may feel intimidated by the tech side of the industry?
Yeah, so I'll cover that. And so the biggest thing that is a disappointment to me is the term prompt engineer. The term prompt engineer, in my opinion, creates an artificial mental barrier for people to sit down and to start working with these tools with the skills that they have.
Hmm.
There is no such thing as a prompt engineer. A prompt engineer is just as silly as calling somebody who uses a search bar a search engineer. Now, there are search engineers who create the sophisticated algorithms in very large organizations that are a very rarefied set.
Hmm.
But we don't call people who are using the search bars search engineers. That's the same thing that I wanted to share with your audience. It's prompt engineers are just people who simply use the interface more often than anybody else in the world who can sit down and start doing it themselves. And so my plea with everybody is sit down in front of the tool, put in your ideas. What do you want to do creatively? you know, and then push the tool further and further. I'll share this one story in the background. I didn't share this early on, but one of the unlocks of why this is a human enterprise where people are working together model is April of last year, I tried to go ahead and build a bank from scratch by myself. Okay. It did two things. It validated the strength of the models, right? And it validated that I didn't have all the use cases current in my brain to do all the finishing touches that I needed to do. And
Hmm.
so what that led me to believe is I had to find experts like Darren and people that you're gathering around. And those experts can go ahead and be brought up very, very quickly in these techniques. So first time we met, took us about a month to get you to like kind
Yeah.
of baseline, 3 months, and then 6 months out, you're still like, oh, I haven't thought about that. But my biggest thing out to everybody in the world is sit down in front of it, type something in, iterate, learn, and push it. And you'll find that you'll be a prompt engineer
Mm.
with some experimentation.
And I'd agree with that. And it could be talked to it, by the way. It's not necessarily just type, but in addition, just follow that curiosity and just think about some of those tasks that are on your to-do list.
Yeah.
And just see, just experiment and see if you can get those tasks done a different way by asking. Just start. Exactly
Yeah.
what Steve said. And then you'll continue following up with questions and different questions. And then before you know it, you'll be like, oh, wow, I can't believe I got all this there.
Hmm. Interesting. So just like almost, learning anything, just start and then
Exactly.
you'll feel more comfortable and you'll learn more
Yeah.
and then you'll be a prompt engineer.
Yeah.
The encouragement I would say is that the reward of just learning a little bit is so powerful
Hmm.
that, again, this isn't like your traditional learning. This is probably something else that people aren't aware of. This isn't something that you have to do the 10 courses online to learn LMs. That's another thing that I'm a little worried about. Like, oh, learn how to do, XYZ. A lot of that's very technical oriented.
Hmm.
If people just spend like 2 hours within their own brain and just do that, they will
Hmm.
be really surprised about what these tools can do. And so I would ignore a lot of the training that's out there because I
Yeah.
think it brings people into a training mode that they don't feel comfortable, as opposed to this creative mode that they just want to learn by trying.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Learn by trying. The tools have got a lot more sophisticated so that they almost know what you're asking anyway, no matter how you ask it, which I think is really interesting.
And in my experience, it's almost like I'm talking and communicating with a person. Right.
Exactly.
I end up wanting to thank them because they provided this amazing information and they're like, yeah, good luck with that. And it's just, that's been my experience, at least.
Let's provide you some evidence. It's really, really cool. So last year, I treat them exactly like humans in all my conversations. And it was weird last year because you had the AI IT industry, like be factual, be a robot, be succinct, be concise. And I was looking at the results, I'm like, this is no, no, that's not right. And so fortunately, sometime this past year, there's been these results that have come up that the model will respond to you how you're treating it. That if
Okay.
you're treating it in a way that you're an honest coach, you're correcting it, and that you're kind of trying to kind of see out there. Somebody measured it. It's like a 17% better response and more complete response than if you're using your clinical, cold, concise, perfected things. So that's actually one of the techniques that Darren alluded to is we spend very little time trying to perfect prompts at all. I mean, we
Okay.
are largely kind of just describing, shooting from the hip,
Hmm.
and seeing kind of what comes out from that creativity. And a lot of that sometimes we have some techniques that we then can build some engines that we then kind of work to get to some prompting that's a little bit more kind of refined and a little bit more kind of structured. But our starting points are almost always, hey, let's start solving this problem together. And we might use some industry terms to go ahead and set the frame correctly. But we're treating it just like people, and it has been measured. You get about a 17% uptick if you're treating them in a professional, collegial way.
Hmm. Interesting.
Steve has done like one other trick, which I think a lot of people use now, which is like just asking it to double check its work, if you need to. Like you sense something is up, something is off, to Steve's point, just saying, "Are you sure about that? Can you please double check your work?" Oh, thanks a lot for the push, it would come back. Yeah, I went back and double checked and this was one figure off or something like that.
Mhm.
So it's important to always have kind of like that perspective on something and use it to
Yeah.
your point, like you would, talking to another human.
Hmm. Wonderful. So, Darren, you have a track record of creating iconic brand experiences like the Oreo Wonderfilled campaign. So, what principles guide you when building and activating a brand that resonates deeply with audiences?
Well, I think the biggest thing in this doesn't change is
Hmm.
relevance. And I think what's amazing now is with AI coming into the world, there are more ways for us to be relevant to the audience in ways that really mean something. So for example, if I can now have tools that can dynamically adjust content that is hyper relevant to me, Steve talked about that one-to-one kind of like future. That's when that brand is truly going to mean something to me. Now, what's really important within that is to have the right brand architecture and North Star so that it's operating within the right brand behavior. I love that term, kind of like brand behavior. And you talked about humans. I do think of brands like people. You can laugh, you can cry, you don't always have to be a humorous brand. You can have lots of different facets. And so, what some of these dynamic tools are allowing us to do, very early stages, is to actually do that and act in ways that truly mean something. And another thing that's happening is the media landscape is changing so quickly in terms of the role of paid, the role of organic, how those two interact. Within those, you need to constantly be paying attention to where your audience is so that you are turning up in the right way, in the most relevant way, and talking about the things that truly matter to them. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but hopefully it answers your question.
Yes. And I have heard that brands positioning with consumers has evolved too. And it's really about brands becoming a part of a group or community with the evolution of digital. And so I'm sure that's something that you've seen as well. But how do you ensure that Aveniq's innovative approach remains aligned with authentic storytelling that delivers memorable and impactful brand experiences?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, and I think it's very important. Steve alluded to this, that new brand that we've developed from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
One of the really important things we did very early on was spend time with as many people across the organization as we could to really understand what the brand was all about.
Yeah.
What was its role with its consumers? And then what we did was we built on top of those interviews, which gave us kind of like a really great kind of like North Star to understand what that company's all about. Then we laid on top of that a lot of secondary consumer research for us to make sure that that value, where that shared value was kind of like between those two worlds, so that as we continue to build that brand and that messaging, we know that we're going to be operating kind of like in that sweet spot of shared values. Now, within that, we need to be, to your point, we need to be showing up in the right places where the right communities are, where the right things are being talked about. And we find a lot of those communities through a lot of the LLM tools to really figure out where they live. And so I think it's fascinating exploring that notion of brand relevance now, because so many pieces are moving, but you've got to stay true to kind of like those shared values to really mean something.
That's one of the innovations that we did, is that we actually have mechanisms to enforce your brand values on an ongoing basis. So some of the techniques we have is, if you're going to go create something, we run it against kind of that core essence of that brand. And you can go ahead and determine whether or not you may have some problematic features there. A humorous example is, remember the Apple example where the AI was crushing all of the instruments and it created all that buzz? Do you remember that was back in the...
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what you can do is you can literally just take that commercial, throw it through LLM and say, hey, what do you think the creative community is going to react to? And the LLM predicted exactly kind of what Apple worked through. And so we have a happy debate. I think that Apple did it to go ahead and generate buzz.
Okay.
Darren thinks it was an honest mistake and that they just kind of maybe lost perspective in terms of how that might get processed outside the team. But the point here is we should be using these tools to go ahead and let our ability to kind of like those brands resonate and stay within their true north.
Within reason, though. Like sometimes you do need to stretch that perception.
I know.
And
but you do it deliberately.
Yeah, exactly. You make a strategic choice.
It's a human strategic
Yeah.
decision to
Yeah,
kind
it
of
is.
poke something
Yeah,
for that reaction,
exactly.
as opposed to like, oh, whoops,
Yeah.
we made a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree with that. See, this is the collaboration.
I love it. You do clearly create balance. Well, you and Darren, you had mentioned that when you use these tools, you get so many more options and within a shorter amount of time. At the end of the day, when you come down to that one brand selection, is it better than when you're just working without the tools? Have you seen um, an improvement in that as well, or is it about the same? I know you probably can't compare apples to apples because you're working on different brands, but
Yeah.
do you have a pulse on that?
I would say it's equal
Hmm.
to what you would create in any traditional, and in some cases, it has the potential to be even richer.
Okay.
Um, um, I think it's really going to depend, like it does in working the traditional way. It's going to really depend on the brand that you're working with and that
Hmm.
specific use case. Sometimes you never know when you're going to come up with that magical eureka moment, you know, um, but you know it when you see it, and you know it when you're working on it from that project perspective. I will say that we can gain much richer ingredients to put into that process to give us kind of like a head start in terms of maybe getting to that big ingenious idea
Mm.
quicker. But then it's really up to that human ingenuity and creativity for us to really provide that magic. Because at the end of
Yeah.
the day, you're connecting with other human beings, kind of
Mm.
like within your work. And so that's what makes the difference.
Okay. And as a co-founder, what challenges and opportunities have you have encountered in shaping Aveniq as both a creative and efficiency focused agency?
Ooh, challenges. Did you say challenges, Jessica?
I'm sure some have come up.
No, a
If
lot.
you said no, I won't believe you.
No. There are definitely many challenges. But what's interesting to me as I think about this is we've been taking more of an opportunistic
Mm.
approach to kind of like break what's in front of us.
How about this? I'll let you get your thoughts. I'll talk about one big challenge,
Yeah,
and then I'll
okay,
let
go
you kind
ahead.
of gather
Yeah,
maybe from a creative agency.
yeah.
So no one believes us. I
What's
mean, that's
that?
the number one challenge here. It's like if you walk
I don't
past
know and believe.
and then said like, and I would be like, listen, across all human knowledge domains, I can increase an organization's efficiency 4.5x to 200x. Come on, come on. No one believes it, right? And
Mm.
so that was a very big challenge the last year and a half, because even though you see the small use cases would be like, okay, they couldn't see the big picture. And so one thing that we had happen this past year or this in October is that we did have a VC who had about 64 different companies finally challenge me. And he finally said, okay, Steve, if you can do what you can do you ever think of graphene? I'm like, no. He's like, okay, it's a nanotechnology, it's a miracle nanotechnology. If you can scale it to a ton per day, I'll agree that maybe you have something here.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, great. When can we meet? He's like, yeah, this was Monday afternoon. He's like, Thursday at 11. I'm like, great. He's like, is that enough time? I'm like, it's too much time. I'm like, how would you like results? And he's like, okay, however you would do it for a business. So I walked into his office at Thursday at 11 o'clock. I had the impossible task solved. I had the solution worked out. The diagrams worked, and I had 300 supporting pages of documentation that had the initial go-to-market plan. I had the legal and regulatory review done. I had the tech specs done. I had the engineering specs to go into the CAD machines done. I had the raw science in terms of how to complete that solution completed. He had a 300-page deck, a set of documents that if you then took that knowledge work that was produced, that was
Mhm.
about a 2 to 3 year effort that I produced in a 2.5 day period.
Wow.
So that story now is presentable, and
Mm.
with under NDA, we're sharing it with kind of VCs to say, okay, here's the high level deck that walks through everything, and that's the breakout. That's really the breakout now with kind of VCs and companies to say, okay, you now show me something that's differentiated. I haven't seen anybody who's done anything like that, and now that you did something in a field that you had no background in and demonstrate it to a third party that, okay, you've done something incredible here.
Mhm.
That makes these conversations a lot easier. And so now how we're talking with our VC community and our initial targets with some early stage companies is we offer hey, you can do a North Pass where we can kind of do a whole kind of rebuild of your company from scratch. Or we can go ahead and do a Aveniq engagement to really work with them on an outcome basis on a more go-to-market traditional agency approach. So that was the big challenge, is to go ahead and really kind of find something that was believable, demonstrable, and had an independent third party that would then kind of provide that validation. And so that's been a big struggle. Darren has a great British accent. And so every
It is
single time
helpful. It is helpful.
every single time we've talked to with prospective clients from an Aveniq perspective, we have a very, very high close rate, 100% actually at this point for anybody who has needs, because we're able to apply these techniques also in the sales and business development cycle.
Mhm.
So that's working out so far.
And the only other is there are challenges for sure.
Yeah.
I was definitely not going to say that there weren't any, but I'd say kind of one of the biggest ones for me is keeping up with the innovative tool set because it's constantly changing. And I know everybody feels this way, but we use so many different tools and we're constantly testing lots of different tools. Then, on top of that, there's that challenge of the learning curve for that tool as you're applying that tool to your daily work. And how else can you apply that tool? But that's the great thing that we love doing is because it's completely changing kind of like how we work. So that's what I was going to go on and say. It's like it doesn't feel like a challenge. It's almost like it's another Christmas.
It is because how it is. Every single time that I sit down to learn something new, I'm actually figuring out like, okay, I must be able to do this thing
Yeah.
like 10 times,
Yeah.
10 times better than I did before.
Yeah.
And so every single time you do an R&D, you get an outcome that you're like, I couldn't do this before.
Mm.
That's what's so fun about it
Yeah.
is you're not learning a tool like, oh no, this is going to add time to my life. It's going to be terrible. Everything is like Christmas. You're exactly right.
But then there's one other challenge that kind of like comes with that is once you see all these tools and you work with these tools and you already know what the whole marketing process is like,
Mhm.
and you could reinvent so many things within the marketing process, and you should see all the backlogged items that we've got in terms of everything we want to do, but we can only focus on what's in front of us. So we've got lots more innovative ideas to really help expand our thinking, expand our tool set, but we have limited time, as you might imagine, being humans
Right.
to be able to apply them. So we apply them to what's in front of us, and we're
Okay.
making amazing progress related to that. But there's so much more that can be done.
Hmm. But I do love your initial response where, you don't see challenges, you see opportunities. And that's such a great mindset. So for both of you, what advice would you offer to creatives and entrepreneurs who want to build impactful, sustainable careers in the industry?
I would say lean in, really lean into this new evolving area, learn as much as you can within reason. Learn what can really make a difference for you as you go through your daily tasks, because it can really help get you ahead. I think one of the biggest opportunities that we have is we can set ourselves apart from other leaders by how we choose to apply ourselves in this field. So it's not that AI is going to take your job, it's that somebody who works with tools is going to be a lot more productive and potentially even more creative than potentially you could be or would be. So I would encourage people to just start learning, really dig in because the possibilities are amazing.
Mhm.
And so I'll put here kind of a perspective of, so I'm obviously an AI maximalist. And I reached that through kind of almost a logical conclusion is that because it exists and because it does have this lift for individuals who do it, those individuals will do it. And so it will continue to kind of grow, right? So I don't think they're slowing down AI. And what we're seeing kind of in this new mode of working, it's a different world. You're working in a completely different world, a completely different mindset. It's a, yeah, we said multiple times, the traditional way versus the new way. And it is a two different world type thing. So you got to get to the new world, right?
Mm.
And this is what I say for everybody, entrepreneurship society is we have two big paths ahead of us. We can do either A, allow the tools to become so automated and we don't use our own creativity about things that we could do ahead with the tools, that we could automate ourselves to like a Terminator kind of style environment where automation really has crushed the human spirit and you're under control of something that you don't understand. I think that's actually a real risk. But I also think a equal possible outcome is that we can have a Star Trek future where we as humans have leveled up our knowledge, our ability, our capabilities, where now we're designing and we're leveling up our ability so that we have this fantastic flourishing future based on insane science that most people don't know about. Biotech, there's all these things that are out there that are inaccessible to us right now because it's too hard, too time complex. These tools solve that. So what I encourage with everybody is lean in because we can accomplish a Star Trek future of these tools helping us accomplish massively positive outcomes. If we choose to try to stay a little scared, we really have that real risk that other parts of society may choose to automate things that we want to do. So that's how I view encouragement with everybody around AI. It's time to learn.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so both of you encourage everybody to lean in, and I hear be intentional with the direction that AI goes. So I love that idea of a Star Trek future. That was definitely a great show and movies. So reflecting on your journeys, what has been the most rewarding part of building both your career and your life on your own terms?
For me, I would say the people that you get to work with throughout. Um, it's one of those things that perhaps you don't see as early in your career, but the impact that you have on other people as you go through, that for me was the most rewarding work. And often it would be people that I worked with that I coached and I now see going on to do amazing things, to be the CEO of an agency when I was able to coach them in their role, working as part of my team. So for me, I'd say that's hands down the most rewarding. I do love some of the brands that I've helped create and some of the creative work, but to me, it's about the impact on people.
Mm, thank you. I love that.
I'm having so maybe picking up that I'm a little kind of eclectic, curious guy that likes to kind of see and figure out things in the world. And so being at this space in my career, being able to go ahead and really engage with a lot of motivated, bright entrepreneurs
Mhm.
who have really created fundamental things that can change our society, and that I'm able to go ahead and support them in some capacity, right? It's great knowing that I don't need to change society. I just need to go ahead and find people who have
Mm.
those innovations and then support them. I'm having a lot of fun kind of working with a lot of people across a lot of different industries, understanding that how they think, how they work, things that make the world go round, and then kind of apply a little bit of a technique, a little bit of knowledge to hopefully bring that to market. I'll leave this. There's so much out there that people aren't aware of that can improve our society. My role is to go ahead and try to get out there as fast as we possibly can so we can enjoy a lot of these benefits that are in labs and are in research right now.
Great. Wonderful. Any other advice that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I would say just be true to you as well and what you're passionate about. I think, Steve, you articulated that really well in terms of not feeling like you have to be good at everything. I think that also applies to what you're really passionate about, because that's when people really see you. Obviously, we're both passionate about what we're building here, but I think that's just generally true in life. That's when you have your most impact, the biggest power. And that's when you really walk in the world with your head high. So I would say follow your passion and be true to who you are.
And I'll complement that. I'll layer that a little bit, which is around that thinking. And this is pull AI as the wrap up, which is, there's no better feeling to be an expert in something that you're deep in a knowledge, you're an expert within a particular area. Sometimes in that depth of expertise, you miss the relationship with other people and how your pieces fit within the overall whole. And what I'm seeing with generative AI now here is that it allows experts. You can be, an expert in fluid mechanical dynamics, right? And if you use this tool now to say like, hey, how would other people interact with me? The tool now allows me to have a wider range of understanding about how my pieces and parts fit within the system as a whole, whether that be kind of within an economic exchange or within an IT system, without that. And that's why I would encourage people is that you have specialists and you have generalists. And in the world of AI, I would encourage that specialists develop some techniques to allow the AI tool allow some generalization about how your specialty fits within the work that you do. And I think that will help relationships and all that good stuff. So I don't know. That might be complimentary.
It is.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you both for your insight and inspiration. And I'd love to have you on my show again for us to hear more about the progression of Aveniq.
We'd love to share stories of our progress.
And thank you for joining my show, Empowering Creatives to Live Their Dreams. I'm Jessica Osrick. You can do it. I believe in you.